Hello and welcome to Tarot Electric. I am Mary Shock. I'm offering you all a tarot card for guidance to start things off. First and foremost, for your highest good. It's Strength, which actually fell out of the deck while I was shuffling, and I popped it back in, but it came up again. Shows me that I should obviously always recognize when things fall into place like that. And for those of you following along, I have been pulling from the major arcana for each of these episodes and then removing that card the next time that we shuffle. So in this way, if you've listened, you've gotten guidance from each tarot card of the major arcana as we've gone through these episodes, and there are only 4 cards left after this week. So after, I don't know exactly what I'll do, probably go to a full 78 card deck because I've been using the Summer Tarot deck that I created. Anyway, Strength is a beautiful card. It's card number 8 in my deck. And Strength really asks us to honor our inner strength. It's not an expression of force or aggression that we express in the outside world. Instead, strength is a pillar of inner strength that we have at our core. And the truth is, we always have this inner strength within us, each human being. But strength comes up during a time when we need this card to be a mirror for ourselves so that we can see how strong we are. Strength, as card number 8, asks us to find balance. It's a very meditative card and it's receptive. So it is about finding strength within stillness, silence, and within ourself, and letting that emanate outwards. Strength comes up sometimes with tests and challenges. So if you feel that you are being challenged at this time, know that that is just the universe throwing you only what you can handle in these tests so that you can see and recognize how strong you are. So we're building up your strength and we're putting these challenges in front of you so that you can look within and say, wow, I can handle that. I can handle anything. That's how strong I am. And strength also, because it has this idea of balance, there is often a call to balance our heady, mental, logical self with our animal, instinctual, fiery, creative, passionate, sexual self. And strength will come up when we're called to bring those two into a balance. And often in this society, we are not taught to honor our animal selves, our instinctual selves, and our creative and sexual selves. We're often taught to push those things down within us and instead to follow an intellectual path as the greatest path. But strength as a card asks us to rise up and honor our creative sexual self and let that be an equal piece of ourself that is important, that is worth giving love and attention to, and that is worth exploring. So if you are feeling a call to honor your root chakra, honor your grounding, honor your sexual being, honor your creative, passionate, fiery self, strength is asking you to do that at this time. So those are a little bit of all the things that strength can bring up, and I hope that you're all feeling your limitless strength and power that comes from the piece of the divine that lives within you. I think strength is a goddess card. I love to see it come up. It's not without its challenges, but it is a card that asks us to love ourselves and to recognize how strong we are. So I hope that really resonates with all of you. I hope you all listened to last week's episode, number 20, with Jonah, because I truly loved recording that episode. I thought it was an amazing interview, and I really appreciate Jonah for being on the show. And even the episode before that with Maxie was incredible, talking about spiritual Appalachian Trail pilgrimage. So just know that I've got some really good interviews lined up for September, October, and into the fall. And those are coming, so get excited because we've got some really good stuff. Today's episode is a solo ep with little old me, but I'm going to talk about the history of tarot, which I've been wanting to share with you all for a while. It is a daunting task for me to try and articulate the history and the origins of tarot, because it's just a really big subject, and it's in some ways controversial, and it involves a lot of history, a lot of esotericism, and just a whole lot of knowledge and research. And then there are constantly new discoveries being made or being brought to the public about tarot. So, if you are a tarot scholar and you think I said something wrong, or you're offended by any of my tarot ideas, let me know. I'm happy to hear it, and just know that I'm doing my best to share this with the people. But before we truly get into it, I just want to update everyone about some stuff that I have going on. I'll be back in Baltimore very soon, and I'll be there for September and the fall, and probably into the winter. So if you have been wanting an in-person tarot reading with me, feel free to reach out. I'll be available for that. You can always get a tarot reading with me via email, video chat, or the phone. So if you're not in Baltimore, I'm still totally available to read tarot with you. But for my Baltimore folks, I am coming back, so schedule with me now. And I have a couple great events. So like my homecoming event is Sunday, September 10th. We've got tarot and cocktails at Golden West. I'll be reading with the fabulous Rain Alexander. So please come out, get a mystical cocktail and a tarot reading. It's going to be really fun. You can say hi to me and welcome me home. So please come out and see me in Hamden at Golden West on September 10th. And then we have got 2 tarot clubs coming up. We have a mid-month tarot special. Tarot club for September is the 17th. Sunday, September 17th, we've got Be More Tarot Club at Holy Underground. Starts at 7. There are Facebook details on the event page. Join our Facebook group, Be More Tarot Club. I'll put links to everything in the show notes. But September is going to be great because we are in Tarot Club. We've been discussing one card of the major arcana every month. This is because if I could only share one thing with folks that I get to share tarot with, it would be the importance of the major arcana, because I just think it's essential. And we'll talk even a little bit more about that today in our history lesson. But so we've been going through the major arcana, and we finally have reached card number 8. And this is going to be a great discussion because card number 8 is either strength or justice. We're going to talk about where that discrepancy comes from, and then all of our personal feelings about it. So please come share your thoughts and feelings. That's going to be amazing. And that's Sunday, September 17th. And then October 1st, that's a Sunday, we have Be More Tarot Club. astrology special with special guest Cheryl Fair. So Cheryl's going to come and give a little lecture about astrology and tarot, how they relate and the correspondences, and there'll definitely be time for questions and discussions. So please come out to both of the tarot clubs. I would just love to hang with all of you. Tarot Club is a free event, but donations are always welcome, of course. And my last little bit of update is also a thank you. Thank you to everyone who has signed up to become a patron of me and this podcast, Tarot Electric, on Patreon. So if you appreciate Be More Tarot Club, Tarot Electric, everything that I have to share, I would much appreciate your support and contribution on my Patreon page. So you can visit that at patreon.com/Tarot Electric. I'll put the link in the show notes, and you can subscribe to become one of my patrons there for just a contribution of at least $1 a month. You'll receive monthly tarot scopes, which have been a blast to write. So if you sign up right now, you'll get to read your September tarot scopes, which I've had good feedback on so far. And I would love to hear your thoughts about how that tarot scope resonates with you. And there's another option to get monthly tarot readings, personal tarot readings from me. So if you are able to contribute, I would so appreciate it, and I'm excited to put out the content that I'm able to release for my patrons on Patreon. So please check it out if you can. All right, without further ado, we're going to get into the history of tarot. So I did a ton of research for this podcast, and I used notes from classes that I have taken. Most recently, a class I took with Michael M. Hughes, an amazing tarot reader, teacher, and friend. Really illustrated the history of tarot in an easy to understand way. So if you're able to take a class with Michael M. Hughes in the future, Tarot Bootcamp, I would highly recommend it. You'll get even more info. And I've taken classes with other teachers in the past and done the research, but I always have to do it again just because this subject is large. There's a lot to say, and I would just really encourage everyone to go out there and research it for yourself. There are so many great articles about the history of tarot and playing cards and all the different little side streets this topic can take. So it's basically endless, and I encourage you to get out there and research it for yourself. I'll put links to the research websites that I was able to look at in preparation for this, and just know that I'm not gonna get everything perfect, and I'm probably not gonna pronounce everything correctly. There's a lot of French names in here, so please be forgiving with me. All right, so I've talked before about tarot myths, so I'm not gonna go that much into why people have these incorrect ideas about the origins of tarot. For example, the myth that tarot originated in Egypt or India or with the Romani people. All wrong. And the truth is that tarot originated as a deck of playing cards used for a gambling game. Tarot originated in Renaissance Italy. There's no evidence to suggest that tarot was created before the 14th century at the earliest, and the 15th century at the latest. So that's the time frame of origin for tarot, 14th century to the 15th century. That's what we got. Now, the origin of tarot is super wrapped up in the origin of playing cards. So while tarot originated in that Renaissance Italy, we don't have any evidence for tarot cards coming from outside of Europe. We do have playing cards originating in Islamic societies centuries before the Renaissance. So what makes a deck of playing cards and a deck of tarot different is that major arcana. So in a deck of playing cards, you have 4 suits and court cards. And in the tarot, you have the suits and the court cards, but you also have a group of cards that are numbered that are not suited. So it's that group of unsuited cards that follow allegorical themes that makes tarot so special. That's why I like teaching the major arcana as the most important thing, because it really is the piece of the deck that sets tarot apart and really makes a deck of tarot cards tarot, is that major arcana. So before you even had tarot cards, you did have playing cards. Playing cards originated in ancient China and then moved through the East, eventually coming up to Europe through Egypt. So during the Mamluk period in Egypt, they were creating really beautiful playing cards with 4 suits, and they are very similar to a Marseille tarot deck. You've got cups, coins, swords, and batons or wands. The wand suit were actually designed to be polo sticks at the time, and then later were adapted and evolved into what we would think of as wands. In 1370, you had these Islamic style playing cards being brought into Italy and Spain. Before this, there was a tradition of these allegorical triumphing parades, and this is often seen as an origin of tarot. So there were mystery plays and different allegorical scenes that were being portrayed in these traveling shows that would literally travel through these European towns and cities on floats like a parade, and then they would be depicting hell and the devil and angels and all this other allegorical, mythological figures and characters. So this was all happening, and there are poems about it and paintings about these triumphing parades, processions. So that's one place to look for an origin of tarot and a way in which the Italian and European people were expressing these allegorical ideas and thoughts and characters. And it seems like it would be natural if they were already playing with these ideas and characters and making them into art and poems, that they would then be transferred into these playing cards. So that's one place to look for an origin. In 1425, we have reference that the Duke of Milan commissioned a card game based on these types of allegorical figures. And that is what most folks would determine the first reference to a tarot deck. And then out of these courts of Milan, we see the earliest known tarot decks that we have cards remaining from, and that is the Visconti tarot deck. And it was hand painted, created for royalty. And that's going to be the case with tarot for many years, that all the tarot decks that were being created were hand painted and they were for royalty specifically. So you see it first in Italy and then it spreads. And the Visconti tarot deck has been reproduced largely. So you can check out these cards. They're so beautiful, and they feature a lot of really similar imagery that is still on decks that are being created today. Tarot decks were being used strictly to play a gambling game similar to bridge, and it was called Trionfi. You have a priest in 1470 writing about against really game playing and gambling, and he lists the tarot trumps in basically the same order that we have them today. That's called the Steel Sermon. Tarot is spreading at this point, starting throughout Italy and then into France and Spain. So you're looking at the southern Mediterranean, then it starts spreading out and up through Europe into Germany, Switzerland, all over basically. And the name shifted. So originally it was called Trionfi. This then became known as another game that was played with a regular deck of tarot cards. So then the original game Trionfi, played with the tarot deck, started to be called Tarocchi. This game is still played in Europe. So Tarocchi is becoming popular. It's spreading throughout Europe, and the decks are becoming standardized. And in 1660, you have the Jean Noblet first published deck, and that is close to Tarot de Marseille, which is became like the most common reproduction of tarot, and really standardized the order of the trumps and the symbology, because before that folks had really played around with what the cards looked like and would put in regional references or make the queens look like the queens of the region, etc. But so in this like 1600s, late 1600s into the 1700s, you're starting to see the decks being widely produced and standardized. And they're the most popular in that like 17 to 1800s. And then, so now we're finally getting to a place where tarot is being thought of as something that could be used for divination and something other than playing a card game. And that is with Ateia. Before we get into the occultists, I want to discuss the symbols in tarot as they're related to their origins in the Italian Renaissance, because the symbols, the patterns, the references in a traditional deck of tarot cards would have been easily recognizable and understandable to the folks of the Italian Renaissance. And that's because their symbols were found in all these early printed materials and books and paintings and art and the architecture on the street. So even before you had a literate society, these symbols would have been well known to the people of the European Mediterranean, and they would have been found in their fabrics and their clothing and their jewelry and the furniture and the buildings. So all of these symbols they were wrapped up in the society, and a lot of times in art, symbols were used to portray certain things so that folks knew what they were looking at, even if they didn't read. So if you had a society that couldn't read, but you had images of artwork and then it was surrounded by lions, the people of that time would know that, oh, this is a king, or this is someone royal. And that's a very like simple example, but it's all over tarot. So the symbols are really deeply entrenched in that culture of Renaissance Italy, and then even pre-Christian Italy as well. And in this way, tarot's traditions were passed down and handmade from one generation to the next. So they changed and evolved, and things got added and things got lost. The tarot symbols were deeply rooted in the Christian imagery that was prevalent at the time of the Renaissance. So that's why you have such heavily Christian and like references even to the Church of Rome and the Pope and the papacy. You have the Hierophant, you have Judgment, which is Judgment Day. So it's very much related to the Christian culture of the time. But there are also a lot of ideas in the tarot imagery that were related to ancient Greek philosophy. And that's because the Renaissance was really inspired by the reintroduction of these ancient classics into Europe. So there are like Platonic ideas and Greek philosophy that is all wrapped up in tarot as well. So you can also see pre-Christian imagery, because that pre-Christian imagery of like pagan Europe just got evolved and wrapped up and transformed to kind of match the Christian stuff that was going on. But because folks of pagan Europe would have related to it, it just got kind of warped into being Christian stuff. So that's really just put it out there that tarot is a mix of lots of different traditions and imagery, but it is firmly rooted in the Italian Renaissance as a place where all of that was kind of brought together, and even the pagan traditions were allowed to be examined again in art and literature. I have heard suggestions that tarot was used for magical purposes before the 1700s, with the rise of occultism in Western thought, which we're going to talk about. Like, I've heard that a woman was accused of witchcraft during the Inquisition, and there are records that she was using a devil card from a tarot deck to curse someone. So there's definitely ideas and possible evidence for tarot's mystical uses pre this Western occultism. But the official, like, tarot started to be used for divination and magic, the official answer for that is it started is hard to say, right? But the first person that was writing about tarot for divination, that was writing about tarot as something other than a deck of playing cards, was Antoine Court de Gablin. He wrote this was the 8th volume, but he wrote this massive encyclopedia of occultism and mystical practices called Primitive World, Analyzed and Compared with the Modern World. That's the translation of the French title. Court de Gablin was a Freemason and just an occultist, and he wrote in this 8th volume of the Primitive World, Monde Primitif. In the 8th volume, he writes about tarot, and he writes that tarot has an origin in ancient Egypt, where he believed tarot was the secret teachings of ancient Egypt. This is totally false. This is incorrect. However, this idea then just was picked up and spread. No one really questioned it. Everyone kind of went with it after that and started to expand. But because Court de Gébelin was a Freemason, so the Freemasons were coming up in the same time, right? 1717 is the first Masonic body that's recorded in England. So the Freemasons always would, and still do sometimes, describe their origins in this mystical, mythological, allegorical way, and have all these references to ancient Egypt and the Bible in their origin story. So when Court de Gébelin looked at this deck of tarot cards, he probably recognized symbols that the Freemasons were using and saying, we're connected to ancient Egypt, and these symbols are connected to ancient Egypt. Then Court de Gébelin looked at the tarot deck, saw these same symbols, and must have thought, oh, this deck is also connected to ancient Egypt. Or if he wasn't so, if he didn't actually think this, which is probably generous to just be like, he really thought they were from ancient Egypt. I mean, that's probably generous, right? But at the very least, he saw that connection with Freemasonry and ran with it, and probably liked the idea of giving tarot this mythical origin, because that was used to legitimize and also hide the actual origins and inner workings of these in Freemason and the secret society, not secret society, but fraternity, that had secrets, and then with tarot being something that maybe he wanted to keep that secret too in some ways. So regardless of why Court de Gébelin gave tarot this origin in Egypt, it went off from there, right? Then the first person that was a professional tarot reader who was writing about it, who we have records of, who was a man, was Jean-Baptiste Alliette, who later went by the moniker Attila, which was his last name spelled backwards. So Attila was a fortune teller who said that he learned to read cards from an Italian person, and he originally read with a regular deck of playing cards, and wrote a book about that, and wrote a book about cards for divination. Then he later started writing about tarot, created his own tarot deck. So you have Court de Gébelin and Attila as these early usherers of tarot as a mystical thing and as something to use for divination. So Attila had written this book about fortune telling with a regular deck of playing cards, and then he wrote a book about tarot specifically. Then he produced an occult tarot deck, and you can still check that out. It's in print. Le Grand Attila. I think it's a really beautiful deck, actually. And from there, the occult community just went crazy with it. They started printing all kinds of tarot decks and tarot writing. In 1783, Attila published his book, How to Entertain Oneself with a Pack of Cards, called Tarot. And from there, everyone's just writing all kinds of tarot stuff and magical stuff. And finally, when we get to 1888, you had the creation of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And that was founded by William Westcott and S.L. Mathers. And the internal structural writing of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn gave tarot a very important role and really put tarot into a high place in their order. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was a magical society. They practiced the occult, metaphysics, paranormal, and it's just a very influential group of Western occultists. Eliphas Levi wrote a book about Western magical tradition that talked a lot about tarot and inspired a lot of occultists, including Oswald Worth, who published a deck, and Pappas, who published Tarot of the Bohemians, and even inspired some of the original writing that helped to found the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So Levi's very important. Golden Dawn's very important. A lot of this is happening in London. Stuff is also happening in Paris. Just a big occult world of a bunch of like white dudes who are writing about occult things, right? And to be honest, they're putting a lot of stuff in there that comes from other cultures. They're checking out a lot of Renaissance information. They're talking about alchemy. They're talking about ancient Greece. They're talking about astrology and Kabbalah and everything else. Okay, so Golden Dawn's, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, very important. And Arthur Edward Waite was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. If you know tarot, you probably have heard of the Waite tarot deck. Arthur Edward Waite was a late 19th to 20th century writer, member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, later became a Freemason, and the creator of what Waite called the rectified tarot. So Waite was inspired by all the tarot decks that had been created with Western esoteric revival, but shunned the idea that tarot came from Egypt and created his own deck and called it the rectified tarot deck, and believed that it was closer to the true mystical meanings of tarot, more true than any other tarot deck. Waite published the Rider-Waite tarot deck in 1910 and also published the accompanying book, The Pictorial Key to the Tarot. And Waite was heavily interested in Christian mysticism and put a lot of Christian mystic imagery and thoughts and ideas into the deck. Waite referred to the coins as pentacles, so was bringing in this like occult tradition. You know, you even see, not just with Waite, but with all the tarot decks of that era, the batons, polo sticks becoming wands and becoming a reference to the wand as a reference to ceremonial magic. The pentacles are a reference to that tradition. So we're bringing in all these esoteric ideas and references to ceremonial magic. Waite was bringing in a reference to Renaissance Europe with the clothes that the figures are wearing and how all the characters really look like they're coming out of Renaissance Europe. So we think that Waite was doing this to bring tarot back to its true origin. It's worth noting that most tarot decks refer to the card we think of as the page as the princess and had it connected to the queen, and often instead of the knight you had a prince, so you would have princess, prince, queen, king. And Waite did change the page to the princess. Other people creating decks around that era might have also made those changes too, but you see it in that time frame. And we're also there's reason to believe that Waite agreed with this change because it brought the idea of the pages having to do with news and messages in a divinatory way. So that was a good reason to make that change, and that would fall into the idea of rectifying the tarot. Waite's tarot deck at the time was called the Rider Pack. The Rider Company was the publishing company who published the cards, and today we often call it the Rider Waite. So you have the Rider, the company that published, and then you have Waite, as in Arthur Edward Waite, who designed the deck, but many people now will refer to it as the Rider Waite Smith deck, in reference to Pamela Coleman Smith, who was the artist who created the deck, the imagery, the art. Pamela Coleman Smith was nicknamed Pixie, which I think is adorable, and she was a British artist. She was a member of the Golden Dawn, but she hadn't gone through many of the initiatory levels, so she didn't have all of the information. She was involved in some ways, but she wasn't like a high level member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, but she was certainly involved, and that's no doubt how Waite was able to get in contact with her. And she was also heavily involved in theater. Her father was from Brooklyn, and she actually went to Pratt Institute and studied art there. She then moved back to England and got into the theater scene and was working on costumes and set design, which some people say you can see all of that referenced in her paintings on the Waite Smith deck. If you look, you can definitely see how they resemble these stage pieces, and some people even say that they have like Shakespearean references because of her history with the theater. And she's just such a fascinating person, and there's so much debate about how much influence she had over this tarot deck, right? Because there's definitely evidence to suggest that the cards had references to things that are a part of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn that she would have had no knowledge of as a like preliminary member, that only Waite could have put those references in the deck because he had all of the information. But the Waite Smith deck is so different from the ones before it because it has the illustrated pip cards. So those are the suited cards, the 2 of Cups, the 3 of Swords, the 4 of Pentacles. Instead of having just 4 swords, like maybe a traditional deck of playing cards would have 4 spades, and that's what you see in those older Renaissance deck, like the Marseille decks. And what really sets the Waite Smith deck apart is that those pip cards are illustrated with scenes. So you have little stories happening for each of the pip cards. And there's definitely evidence to suggest that Waite had very strong ideas about the major arcana, but maybe less about the minor arcana. And Pixie created these cards in a very short amount of time, 6 months. She painted 78 cards. So it's hard to imagine that Waite was standing over her shoulder the whole time giving her instructions for all of those cards, right? There's a really cool book that I want to read. It's totally on my wish list, called Secrets of the Waite Smith Tarot, the true story of the world's most popular tarot. And that's written by Marcus Katz and Tally Goodwin. That really dives into Pixie's influence on that tarot deck. So look, it's just a really controversial point of view. I do think that Waite had a big role in designing all of these cards, but I would not discount Pamela Coleman Smith's contribution. She is just a controversial figure in general. We don't know so much about her life. And there are a lot of myths about her. We could do a whole episode about Pixie, right? Maybe if I get and read the book, I should really do that. But there's this whole idea that she might have been, that she was biracial, and I think that that's actually a myth, and she did spend time in Jamaica and then later illustrated these books of Jamaican folk tales, but it seems like she was a white woman. It also seems like she was a lesbian, or at the very least queer, and seemed to have lived with a woman for a long time and enjoyed the company of women. So that makes her someone like near and dear to my heart, and someone that I would like to know more about. She certainly had synesthesia, where she got visions, and she could, that's when you see colors, and you see colors to music, and so that certainly influenced her art. Everyone always says she died penniless. This seems to be because she had converted to Catholicism towards the end of her life, and I believe ended up giving a lot of money away to the church. But all of this is just really controversial, and I would like to know more. There's definitely more to know about Pamela Colman Smith. For some reason, she's a little bit more interesting for me to research than like all of these white men just again and again giving themselves like fantastical names and deciding what the Hebrew letters meant to them, because they certainly knew, and like this and this and that and that. I mean, it's all fascinating, but I definitely hold a place in my heart for Pixie in what definitely seemed like a man's world in London's occult scene. Another interesting thing about the Rider-Waite-Smith deck and its creation was the possible influence of the Sola Busca tarot deck on the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So the Sola Busca is a very early tarot deck that was actually on display at the British Museum while Pixie was creating the artwork for this deck. So there's a high probability that she and or Waite were looking at this tarot deck on display at the museum, and were influenced by that for their own deck. Like even the Three of Swords is the best example. It's exactly the same with that heart and the three swords stabbed through it. So you can definitely check out the Sola Busca tarot deck, and there's the most beautiful reproduction of it that I totally want. That's on my tarot wish list. The Sola Busca is the earliest known 78 card tarot deck. So I guess it was the earliest one that had all those 78 cards. It did have some crazy, like wild cards that were different. It had Bacchus and other Roman influences or references. So definitely suggest checking out the Sola Busca tarot deck. The images are beautiful, and it almost certainly was influential. There are a couple cards that look like directly referenced. And then the other thing that I want to suggest to everyone, because now that we're here at the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, this is the most popular tarot deck in the UK and the United States. The Marseille deck, those Renaissance prints, are still very popular in Europe, even for divinatory purposes. But the Rider-Waite-Smith is one of the most popular, if not the most popular tarot deck out there. So now that we're here, it's interesting to think about this tarot deck. It's so ambiguous in our culture. If you see a tarot card on TV or a movie, you're probably looking at a Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And the book that Waite wrote with the deck, The Pictorial Key to the Tarot, was written, published at the same time, 1910. This is an amazing book. It's not long and not that many people read it. You know, it's not often up there in your like new age suggestions of tarot books to read. And I really think that that is a missed opportunity because it's so good and it's short. It's not always easy to read because it can be kind of confusing at times, but it's definitely worth getting. So it's not expensive either. So the PDF is available for free online. Hello. So I want everyone to go out and read this book. You know, if you're working with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck or a clone of it, which so many of our modern decks after this deck was printed are inspired by the Rider-Waite-Smith. So if you're working with this deck or a clone, I just highly recommend getting this book because it's so interesting. Now, it's really interesting to read Waite's ideas about the origin of tarot. Waite refused that it was from Egypt, like really called everyone who was saying it was from Egypt, like said they were all idiots, basically was super against that, which is really funny to read. This kind of like tarot sass he was throwing on his contemporaries and the people that came before him. But he does give some ideas of where he believes tarot originated. Now, I'm not going to get super into this, but I will suggest that everyone read Waite's book and read the introduction, not just the descriptions of the individual cards. And you will see that Waite has referenced a book by Harold Bailey called New Light on the Renaissance. This book is an exploration and collection of watermarks and printers' emblems. So it gets into the history of paper making and the symbols and emblems that were used by paper makers and printers. This book is fascinating. The symbols are beautiful. Highly recommend anyone who can check it out. If you want to borrow it from me, let me know. And Waite talks about it in the pictorial key, so I think it's really interesting. And I'm just going to read a little bit about what Waite wrote. So first he goes on and he's talking about everyone who thinks tarot is from Egypt is a complete moron. Then he says, quote, "One brilliant opportunity that has been missed, for it has not so far occurred to anyone that the tarot might perhaps have done duty and even originated as a secret symbolical language of the Albigensian sects. I commend this suggestion." Then he mentions a few people that talk about this, and then he says to Mr. Harold Bailey as another new light on the Renaissance. And oh my gosh. So then he talks about, then he says, "Think only what the supposed testimony of watermarks on paper might gain from the tarot card of the Pope or the Hierophant in connection with the notion of a secret Albigensian patriarch, of which Mr. Bailey has found in the same watermark so much material to his purpose. Think only for a moment about the card of the High Priestess as representing the Albigensian Church itself, and think of the tower struck by lightning as typifying the desired destruction of Papal Rome, the city on the 7 hills which, with the pontiff and his temporal power, cast down from the spiritual edifice which it is risen by the wrath of God." End quote. So, to read between the lines there, it seems like Waite really wished that he could have given Harold Bailey a deck of playing cards and seen the connection between these watermarks and the symbols of tarot. So I'm not going to go super into that because it's definitely just a theory about the origins of tarot and the first people who might have made tarot. But I am going to suggest that everyone read both of these books, The Pictorial Key and New Light on the Renaissance, because they were highly influential to me. And I think that you would get some benefit from those as well. Just to explain a little bit about the Albigensians, they were a set of heretics, so also called the Cathars, are like the same people, and they're early Christians who were always against the Church of Rome, and they were some of the early victims of the Inquisition, and they also happened to be paper makers. And in Renaissance Italy, like, I wonder who was in charge of making tarot cards. Might it have been the people who were making the paper and doing the printing? Okay, the book's amazing, so you just gotta check it out. And if you look at it with a point of view of how could tarot be related to this, it's super, super interesting. Okay, so after Waite has published his deck, we see several years later Aleister Crowley publishing his famous tarot deck, the Thoth Tarot. Crowley was also a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and published the Thoth Tarot in 1944. The paintings for the Thoth Tarot were created by Lady Frida Harris. So we're seeing another woman artist creating the work for these male occultists. Interesting. And it's often proposed that these are the three most famous tarot decks, right? The Rider-Waite-Smith, the Thoth Tarot, and then the classic Marseille, this Renaissance style. Now, so we're in the 40s, this is printed. If you look at the Thoth art on that deck, it will just blow your mind. I mean, it looks like modern New Age, like sacred geometry. You know, the art was so ahead of its time, but it was printed in the 40s. Then you see the rise, like a second coming of tarot was really happening in the 70s in the United States and in Britain, when tarot decks were being republished. Waite's deck was being republished. Tarot de Marseille decks were being republished. And then like in 1968, we see the first like new age postmodern deck, the new tarot for the Aquarian age, which was apparently channeled via Ouija board. So once you get into 68, 70s and beyond, you see new art decks being created and this new age wave. Then in the 80s, you see the Mother Peace deck being published. Rachel Pollack starts writing about tarot. So then there's this whole kind of wave of like feminist, goddess-centric tarot decks. And that kind of brings us up to where we are now. I've heard folks feel like these current days are another revival of tarot, but I would say that it's still going strong since the 70s. Really, it might come in like small currents, but in the 70s you really saw that big revival. Then you see goddessy stuff in the 80s, and in the 90s it was popular because like witchcraft became very popular in the media and pop culture. And I'd say that we're still kind of riding that wave, but it just keeps growing and growing. Tarot's definitely getting more and more known, loved, and recognized throughout the years of me using tarot. So it just keeps growing, and we'll see where we go from there. Wow. Whew. I hope that made sense. I hope that it was interesting. I think that it's important for those of us who read tarot to know where it comes from, because people are going to ask you. And if you say, oh, I don't even know, you're kind of doing everyone a disservice, I think, because they might go off and believe things that are not true or just feel disconnected. And I hope that everything that I've shared here has freed you up to create a tarot system in your heart that works for you, right? Because the main story here is that tarot was invented as a game to play cards with for gambling, and all these occultists put all this special meaning onto it later. The meaning that all these Western occultists put on it is certainly interesting and valuable, and over time must take on like true spiritual meaning because of people believing it, right? But all of the connections that those 18th, 19th, 20th century occultists really put on to tarot, and those are connections with Eastern traditions, with astrology, chakras, the Kabbalah, every Egyptian teachings, everything that those occultists put onto tarot were exactly that. They were put on. So in this way, you don't have to learn anything else. Tarot is a complete system. You do not have to learn anything else to read tarot. You don't have to know astrology. You don't have to know the Hebrew alphabet. You don't have to know any of it. And it would really be disrespectful to those other traditions, ancient schools of wisdom, religion, and spirituality in Kabbalah, in Eastern religions, in Egyptian traditions. It would be disrespectful to those things to go around saying, oh, tarot's related to this, you know what I mean? Without truly knowing where it comes from. But being able to see the connections, that is significant. And in that way, it can be a beautiful and enriching practice to study the Hebrew alphabet with tarot, as long as you know where it's really coming from, right? And I think that it's not that tarot came from these other traditions, but the fact that they will fit in so well at times, and that you can find connections between mythologies all over the world and tarot's teachings, that shows the universal truth that is built into tarot. So it doesn't really take anything away to say that tarot was made as this card game. It was obviously infused with universal allegorical truths, and it's only to tarot's highest good that so many other traditions can be connected to. So I don't know, knowledge is power, and there's a lot to say here, but I really hope this is interesting. If I said anything that you feel like is super wrong, or that made you, just like feel free to reach out, but I don't want to fight with anyone about the history of tarot. So if you have a correction, definitely here to talk and to hear your thoughts, or to learn something new. So you can always email me, maryshocktarot@gmail.com. I also wanted to talk just so briefly about what Jodorowsky says in his book, The Way of the Tarot, which is about Tarot de Marseille. Jodorowsky designed and published a Tarot de Marseille deck, and Jodorowsky, I love the way he teaches. I highly recommend this book, The Way of the Tarot. And so much of it is so good. But also Jodorowsky will say things like they're completely fact when they're not so much. So you just have to read it with that in mind. And it's, you can usually tell like what is true and what is his kind of mystical ideas put into it. Like, he just has reproductions of these cards and says that they're the truest examples of the cards, but some things that are included in those cards are probably from his creation. But who am I to say? Apparently he was working with examples of never before seen tarot cards. It's a great deck and a great book, The Way of Tarot. Anyway, Jodorowsky has a section where he theorizes the origins of tarot as being created out of a European climate before the Inquisition and before the Renaissance, and that's before a Christian Italy and Mediterranean, or during a period of time when Christianity, Judaism, and Islam were all coexisting in Mediterranean Europe, and really like so much in Spain too, right? Because you had Granada and you had the Moorish Empire. So you had this big, powerful Islamic empire that was happening in Spain. During this time, Jodorowsky theorizes the leaders of these three religions could have shared philosophical, religious, spiritual thoughts. And Jodorowsky feels that this intermingling of the three Abrahamic traditions allowed tarot to be created. Maybe leaders of these religions saw the inevitable takeover of Europe by Christianity and created a secret system that contained all the truth and the shared truth of the three religions and encoded it in a secret doctrine with symbols, and that became tarot. This is a fantastical idea that could actually be totally true, right? Because if tarot has anything to do with early Christians and the Cathars and the Gnostics, folks who were Gnostic, you're seeing a people that were influenced by many different cultures and many different thoughts. So even though I think Jodorowsky goes a little far with that, I love the idea of how these three cultures and religions could have mixed and intermingled and shared truths about their religion, and how that could have influenced tarot. I think that's really beautiful. And then I'll just put it out there that I have personal feelings about the origins of tarot as being something more mystical than simply a game to play cards with as well. Whether or not it was created to save truth of a certain religion or many religions, I think that, it's true that many of the early tarot decks and early ancestors of tarot decks, we're not going to have those today because paper was reused. Paper was a scarce commodity, and it was either reused as something else or it was burned, right? Or just lost, because paper is not pottery. It's not going to last for hundreds of years. So we don't have a ton of evidence. And divination, even though this history of tarot has been ruled over, the prominent people in the history of tarot and divination are going to be men. Tarot and divination is often seen as women's work. And fortune tellers are, if you think of a fortune teller in your head, she's gonna be a woman, right? And in movies and in pop culture references, you see this trope of the female fortune teller. So I do not trust history to preserve women's role in tarot, women's role in divination, and and women's possible role in divination with playing cards. So I completely believe that women were reading with tarot cards before Attila, that women were sitting around their kitchen tables um, and reading, telling fortunes, using tarot and other playing cards. And I don't need any kind of records to tell me that that is completely true. And, you're looking at a time when witches were witches and pagans were ostracized, demonized, and attacked. So the fact that we don't have a lot of records about the influence of women and pagans in this tradition does not make me think that they didn't play a significant role. I mean, maybe the next thing for me to do in my study is to study the history of divination, because that's certainly much older than tarot, much older than playing cards, and it's older than the tradition of divination with playing cards. So maybe that would be a really interesting place to go. Tell me what you guys want. Tell me what you think. I hope that this has been helpful. It's been fun for me, a fun challenge to share this. It's not an easy thing to talk about because it's so much like history, and I didn't even go to college, so it's a lot of research and reminding myself what things were happening where, European history, etc., etc. But I hope that this helps you answer that question, because I'm guarantee you're going to get it soon. It happens if you're a tarot person, you're getting this question on a regular basis. Where's tarot really from? So I hope that this helped you. And the answer is a Renaissance card game from Italy. All right, I'm out. I'm going to put a ton of links in the show notes. Send me an email. Let me know how it's going. Tarot Electric. You can find it on iTunes. Please rate, subscribe, review, reach out to me. I just appreciate all of you so much. Okay. Many blessings.